Please rise.
Seated. Jury, please. All right. Maybe soon. First witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Alyssa Clendenning to the scene.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony about to give you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You speak right into the microphone. You can adjust it to however is comfortable.
Hi. Could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Alyssa Clendenning, C as in cat, Lendenning.
And if you wouldn't mind, could you pull the microphone a little closer? I think I probably have to do the same thing. Alyssa, I'm going to get right into the questions. Are you a little nervous today?
Very.
Do you Did you know a person by the name of Stephanie Love?
Yes.
And how did you know her?
She was my best friend.
How did you meet Stephanie?
I was 18 and she was about 16, and I had met her through her cousin. We were at her cousin's house and I had met her there. And then I had a baby shower to go to for one of my other friends, and I wanted somebody to go with me, so I'd asked if she could go with. And her mom said no, but she was able to go anyways.
And ever since then, the two of you best friends?
Yeah.
And so this might seem like a silly question, but in 2010, two of you spent a lot of time together?
Yeah.
What was Stephanie like?
She was just a fireball. She was just fun to be around. Her personality. She was caring. She would give the shirt off her back for you if she needed to. She was a free spirit. She would tell people how she felt about everything and anything. She didn't hold really anything back.
This has been a hard number of years for you, hasn't it? Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to October 9th of 2010. Okay? On October 9th, was there a time when you tried getting in touch with Stephanie?
That was on Saturday. Her and I had talked on the phone pretty much throughout the whole day because I had worked that weekend, and we had plans. We're making plans to do go get our nails done on Sunday morning, or not Sunday morning, but Sunday afternoon.
And that would have been October 10th,
Correct.
2010. Now, at some point in time on October 10th, did you try getting in touch with Stephanie to go get your nails done?
Yes.
And do you remember around what time that was?
The first time I tried was around like 9, 10. It was the first time I had taken like a quick 15-minute break at work. And it had gone right to her voicemail at that time. And then I tried again on my lunch, which was probably around like noon. And it still was going right to voicemail.
And let's talk about that for a second. How was Stephanie about her phone?
Oh, she would never let her phone be off, especially like in the current situation with her boyfriend at the time, because he was incarcerated, so she was always talking to him. She would not let her phone go off or be dead.
And when you say her boyfriend, you're referring to?
Eric
Do you remember his last name?
Mahomes.
And did he go by a nickname that you know of?
E.
And so you indicated that he was incarcerated at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sorry, the court reporter has to write the words down. So he was able to contact her from the jail?
Correct.
And also, did you two talk pretty regularly?
Yeah. I'd say at least once a day.
Did you leave voice messages for her when you called and it went to voicemail?
That I don't recall.
But it was strange that her phone was off.
Correct.
What did you do next once you couldn't get in touch with her? Do you remember?
I want to say that I had called Victor and had seen if she had spoke with him, and he said to call Claudia because he had gotten a phone call from Stephanie's brother, I believe, asking if he had spoke with her too.
Okay, let's just back up a little bit. These are a lot of names. So you said Victor Trevino, do you mean?
Yes.
And that was the former boyfriend of
Correct.
Stephanie. They were still in touch sometimes?
Sometimes.
Claudia, who you refer to, is Claudia Blake?
Correct.
Stephanie's mom?
Correct.
Okay, and then I believe you mentioned Stephanie's brother,
Yes.
and that's Daniel Blake.
Yes.
Okay. So did you get in touch with Claudia?
Yes.
And do you remember around when that was?
Had to been, I would have to say, like 3:30, 4 o'clock.
This is 3:30 to 4 on Sunday,
Correct.
October 10th.
Yes.
And what was decided? What was the plan that was decided between you and Claudia, if any?
That Clark, Claudia's friend, was going to come and pick me up because Claudia couldn't get a hold of her either. So he was going to pick me up because I didn't have a vehicle at that time. And so I had to have somebody pick me up, and that's why Clark was coming to get me.
And when you say Clark, you mean Clark Prosser?
Yes.
Okay, and that was Claudia's friend at the time?
Yes.
Okay. So around what time did Clark pick you up, if you remember?
I'm not quite sure, but if I would have to say, it'd have to be around like 5.
So early, I can do this, late afternoon, early evening hours?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
And I think you said this, but I just want to make sure, was anybody else in the vehicle with you to go check on Stephanie?
Yes. Shelley was with us as well.
And that's Shelley Rush?
Yes.
And Shelley is another good friend of Stephanie's?
Yes.
Now, at the time that Clark picked you up, was Shelley already in the car? If you know?
I don't recall.
But at some point, all of you were together?
Yes.
Heading to Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay. So you arrive at Stephanie's. I didn't ask this before. How long, if you know, has Stephanie lived in this particular residence?
She had October. It wasn't long. I want to say she moved in around July, if I can recall correctly.
So it was just a couple of months?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sorry.
Okay. That's a common mistake. When you arrived at Stephanie's residence, and this was the residence she shared with Eric, correct?
Yes.
What did you, kind of give us the scene, describe it if you can, as to who was where and what you and Shelley and Clark did to the rest of your recollection?
As we walked in, Shelley and I walked in with Clark behind us, and we kind of walked slow because it was just, we just didn't know what to expect. And so we walked in and the dogs were all skittish, and Stephanie had 2 dogs, Chewy, which is like Chihuahua Pomeranian or something like that.
Did you have a kind of a funny name for?
I called it a rat dog because it kind of reminded me of a rat. And then she had another dog, and that was Coco, and she was a pit bull. And the dogs are very skittish, but that particular day they were super skittish. They didn't even really want to come by us.
And so you had been friends with Stephanie for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You were able to tell that the dogs were behaving somewhat differently?
Correct.
And you said that the dogs were both out.
Yes.
Was that normal, or was that somewhat different than usual? If Stephanie was not going to be home?
She usually always had her dogs with her. If she left the house, the dogs were with her because those were her babies. And there was dog pee in the house as well, which is very unusual.
So these are things that you are noticing as you're entering Stephanie's residence? So the dogs are out, behaving skittish. There's dog pee on the floor. Before you made your way into her actual residence, did you see anything outside that struck you as odd? If you recall?
There was a dog crate outside.
Like a kennel?
Yes. And any time that I've ever gone over there, she never had a dog kennel outside of her apartment.
Was there one usually inside the apartment?
I don't remember.
Did you notice anything about the doors, if they were locked or unlocked at the time that you guys arrived?
They were locked.
And just to kind of give a picture to the jury as to what this place looks like, it's a multi-apartment home, is that correct?
There was a store that was underneath, and then there was apartments above, I believe.
So is there a downstairs door and an upstairs door?
Correct.
And would Stephanie and Eric have the only, unless they gave to others, access to that downstairs door
Correct.
and the upstairs door?
Correct.
Okay, so they have a private stairway to get into the residence?
Correct.
Were both doors locked to your recollection upon entering the apartment? If you don't know, that's okay.
I do remember the top door being locked. I don't remember if the bottom one was or not.
And did you have to kind of get creative to get in to check on Stephanie?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
We had used a credit card to get into the door.
Was that pretty hard to do, or was it pretty easy?
That I don't know. I didn't do it.
Who did do it?
Shelley?
Okay, so you had said about 5 o'clock, and this was in October. Do you remember if it was light out or dark out when you arrived?
When we arrived, it was still light out.
And when you made entry into the apartment, and I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute, I just want the jury to kind of picture it first. What is directly upon entering that door?
The top door?
Yep.
It's a little like hallway.
Okay. And then within that hallway or off of the hallway, are there rooms at the end of the hallway, to the left, to the right, something else?
Well, you walk down, it's not a long hallway, it's just a little hallway, and then there's like a closet. And then that main area right there was the dining room. Off to the dining room, there was the kitchen. And then off the dining room was this other little area where the 2 bedrooms were, Stephanie's bedroom and the spare bedroom, and then there was also a bathroom. And then the living room was off of the dining room.
Okay, so as you're coming in, past the hallway, what room do the 3 of you come upon first?
After the hallway would have been the dining room.
Was there anything that you noticed specifically about the dining room that seemed out of sorts or different?
I don't remember.
And once you went past that area, what did you come upon next?
I want to say that's when I went into the kitchen, and that's where the dried pee was from the dogs.
Did you notice anything about the dogs having food or water, or?
I don't recall.
You said the kitchen was where the dog pee was?
Yes.
Anything else notable about the kitchen that you would call for?
No.
After the kitchen, where did you go next?
Her bedroom.
And that's where things kind of struck you, is that fair?
Yes.
What did you notice in the bedroom?
Her bedding was completely off her bed. There was no pillows, no blankets, no sheets. And Stephanie always had sheets on her bed and a blanket and pillows.
So she had moved in within the last few months, but you had been there a couple of times or a lot of times?
A couple.
And in apartments that she lived in the past, had you been visiting with her there?
Correct.
So you can say with some certainty she kept sheets on her bed?
Most definitely.
Did she have, if you know, any kind of favorite blankets or favorite sheets that she would always have? Do I have this one? This is where we practice this. I'm going to show you exhibits that have been pre-marked as 4, 6, 9, and 12, okay? And I'm going to ask if they are a fair and accurate depiction of what you saw when you went into Stephanie's bedroom that day, okay? You can look at this. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of what you saw on October 10th, 2010?
Yes.
Does that refresh your recollection at all as to whether or not you saw these things on the floor?
Yeah. There was one, when you walked into her bedroom, you walked through the door, and you took a couple steps, and her mattress, her bed was right there. And so the door opened into her bedroom, and there was some blood stain on the carpeting right by the head of the bed.
I'm going to publish this to the jury today. Tell me what copies of this.
I do. Thank you.
4, 6, 9, and 12. And again, I know this is difficult, but they're up on the screen behind you. Is that the stain that you mentioned earlier in your testimony?
Yes.
And this might be difficult for the jurors to be oriented. Is that the side of the mattress that you were
I do believe so, yes.
yourself? And then finally, so you're just looking at an up close of the mattress in that picture? Is that what that is?
Yeah. Yes.
Now, once you saw all of the issues with the bedroom, what did you and Clark and Shelby do at that point in time?
Called Claudia.
And to your knowledge, were Claudia and Stephanie close?
Yeah.
Were you nervous about talking to Claudia about what you had seen?
A little bit, yeah.
Was it you that made the call?
That I don't recall.
When, once you called Claudia, what happened next?
I know that we had waited around the area. We didn't leave. And we just kept trying to call her phone. And then, in the meantime, I believe Claudia had called the Wausau Police Department. And so then Clark, Shelley, and I, we waited until the police came.
The one thing there's a couple things I haven't asked you yet. When you were inside of the residence of Stephanie's apartment, when you were in the rooms, did you touch anything or move anything to look around for her to see where she was maybe?
When we had first walked into her bedroom, where the stain was on the mattress, there was actually like a bottle of booze that was closed, but it was like propped there,
Propped where?
like on the bed. But it was completely closed.
So it wasn't leaking?
No.
Do you know if anyone left a note for Stephanie or maybe?
That I don't recall.
When you left, you said you waited in the area. Were you keeping an eye on the apartment?
Yes, to see if anybody was going to go in or if she was just going to show up.
And to your knowledge, based on the time that you were there, did anybody come or go from the apartment?
No. And when we had left, we had relocked the door.
Was it one of those doors where you could kind of twist the lock on the doorknob and pull it shut? Or was it a deadbolt? How did you do that? If you know?
I think it was just one where you twist the back of the doorknob.
Because you didn't have a key, otherwise there wouldn't have been a need for the credit card.
Correct.
I want to talk to you a bit about a phone call that you had with Stephanie in the early morning hours of the 10th, kind of into the 9th, going into the 10th. You had said that you and Stephanie had talked a lot.
Correct.
And was there a time in the early morning hours of late of October 9th into 2010? Let me rephrase that. On October 9th in the evening hours that you were on the phone with Stephanie for a long period of time?
Yes.
And during that time, were you aware that Stephanie had anyone else's phone in her possession?
Yes.
Whose phone did she have?
She had her boyfriend at the time, Eric Mahone's cell phone.
Was that because he was in custody?
Correct.
And did you know anything about that phone? Did it work right? Was it kind of weird or broken or anything like that?
The phone, the face of it was broken, so you couldn't see who was calling or any of that. It was cracked. But, I mean, you could still answer it.
Did the phone have to stay plugged in to work, or could you move around with it, if you know?
That I don't recall.
Okay. So, on October 9th, and I apologize for the date confusion, I was all over it. On that date of October 9th, do you remember what the times were that you were talking to Stephanie?
I remember the last time I was talking to her, it was around 9 o'clock.
p.m.?
Correct.
And how long, if you know, had you been on the phone with her?
It probably was like on and off for like 2 hours.
And during that time, were you aware that Eric's cell phone rang while Stephanie was there?
Yes.
And how did you know that?
Because she was on the phone with me the same time the phone was ringing, and she was like, I don't know why people keep calling his phone.
Because he was
In jail.
And during that time that the phone rang, while you were on the phone with her on October 9th, were you able to hear fully who was on the other line, on Eric's phone?
Hear fully as to what the other person was saying?
I meant more specifically, sorry, that was not a good question. Could you tell who it was on the other line?
Yes.
And how did you know who it was on the other line?
Because I could hear bits and pieces, and Stephanie had also told me that who the person was.
Was the phone that rang while you were on the phone with Stephanie, was it on speakerphone?
That I don't recall.
And did you come to find out that the person on the phone was Kristopher Torgerson?
Yes.
And did you know Kristopher Torgerson before all of this came to be?
Yes.
And how did you know him?
I had known him at the time he was dating another one of my good friends.
And so when, so your understanding is that he was on the phone, or he called Eric's phone that Stephanie had answered sometime before 9 p.m. on October 9th?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. So your understanding is that Stephanie Lowe received a call on Eric's phone from Kristopher Torgerson in the evening hours of October 9th, sometime before or around 9 p.m.?
Correct.
Did you know what the conversation was about based on what you heard?
Not really. I just can recall Stephanie yelling at him, telling him why.
Objection, hearsay. Excuse me, ma'am, I'm sorry. Judge, I'll object on hearsay grounds.
Sustained.
I guess more importantly, and I should have phrased that better.
Your Honor, can we approach on that? This was actually the second motion.
Let's use the jury. Can you be seated?
Your Honor, well, this is obviously, as I always witness, I don't normally argue motions relating to that. This was my issue when we did this pre-trial, and that's why I'm bringing it up. But as far as the question of whether or not it is a statement of recent perception, I disagree with counsel that it has to, that this is not an event. It is an event. The event is the phone conversation between herself and the defendant.
What section are you looking at for exception?
I'm sorry.
What's the statute section?
This is a statement of recent perception, which is 908 till 3.
908.045 sub 2. That's the statement of reasons for such.
So I believe that it clearly is a statement of recent perception because of the fact that it relates to an event, that event being a phone conversation between the defendant and Stephanie Lowe that took place in the very recent past, in fact, within moments of when that conversation takes place. The court, and I know that counsel cited to Stevens that talked about does not generally apply to oral perception of an oral statement made to a person. But what the court looked at in Stevens was a lack of corroboration of the oral statement, essentially. And that was really what the court looked at. That's something that is not required for a statement of recent perception pursuant to State v. Weed, 2003 WI 85, 263 with second 434. But to the extent that Stevens still requires some type of corroboration when it is an oral statement, we have significant corroboration of the statement. We will have cell phone records. In fact, those are cell phone records that have been admitted that shows, in fact, that there was a phone call from the defendant to Eric Mahomes' phone at the time that Stephanie Lowe and Alyssa Clendenning were on the phone together on Stephanie Lowe's cell phone. We will have corroboration that Eric Mahomes' cell phone had a cracked screen and you could not see that by way of testimony from Eric Mahomes. We will have corroboration. One of the things that Stephanie Lowe says is that she told the defendant not to call on Eric's phone because Eric was in jail. There will be corroboration that the defendant, in fact, knew that the defendant was in jail at that time through his own statements where he admits to knowing that. And under the circumstances, with those significant corroborations, the fact that this statement occurred within moments of the conversation between the defendant and Stephanie Lowe, that statement of recent perception should be allowed. To the extent that the court finds that it is not a statement of recent perception, the state believes that it does come in under the residual exception to the hearsay rule. And for that, I refer the court to State v. Anderson, which is 2005 WI 54, 280 with second 104, which was a situation where the victim of a crime makes a statement to a coworker at work about conversations he's had with his son, who is the defendant in that case. And the court found, first off, that both the 90803 sub 24 and the 90845 sub 6 residual exceptions are essentially identical. And the court found that where there's several guarantees of trustworthiness that are present, that the residual exception is certainly appropriate. And those include where the circumstances are such that a sincere and accurate statement would naturally be uttered, no plan of falsification be formed, or even though a desire to falsify might present itself, other considerations such as danger of easy detection or fear of punishment would probably counteract its force. And 3, where the statement was made under such conditions of publicity that an error, if it occurred, would probably have been detected and corrected. In this case, the first one is really the guarantees of trustworthiness that apply. Circumstances are such that a sincere and accurate statement will naturally be uttered and no plan of falsification be formed. Similar to Anderson, this is a conversation between friends. It's a conversation that occurs within moments of the statement, so there's really no ability to form a plan of falsification. And there's no reason to. I mean, she's talking to her best friend on the phone. Why is she going to lie about what just happened in the phone conversation that she had while she's on the phone with Ms. Clendenning about the phone conversation she had with the defendant? So it's similar to Anderson, a conversation that really there's no reason to believe would be falsified and should be allowed as, if the court doesn't find that it is comes in under the statement of recent perception, that it should come in under the residual exception of the hearsay rule. I haven't heard any argument, and clearly no argument that it would be testimonial unless there would be a Crawford issue on it, where it's a conversation between two friends. But to the extent that that's an issue, I think that that's not going anywhere.
You ready to hear from me?
Go ahead.
I'm going to try and keep this pretty simple. I have no objection to this witness testifying that she knew or was made aware by Miss Lowe that there was a phone call from Kristopher Torgerson while she was on the phone with Miss Lowe at, I think it's 9:00 p.m. That communication from Miss Lowe to Miss Clendenning is hearsay, but there's an exception to hearsay because that's a statement of recent perception by Miss Lowe to Miss Clendenning saying, there's an event that I'm observing, a condition that I'm observing, recently perceived, Torgerson's on the phone. My problem is that if Miss Clendenning is then allowed to testify as to what Miss Lowe said was the content of the phone call, which I submit, I presume would be something like, I told Torgerson not to call anymore, I told him Mahomes is in jail, maybe there's more. That conversation, that assertion by Miss Lowe to Miss Clendenning about the content of Miss Lowe's conversation with Torgerson, as communicated to Miss Clendenning, is rank hearsay, and it's not a statement of recent perception. Now, if the state is saying, well, and incidentally, there would be a Sixth Amendment right of confrontation because I don't have the ability to cross-examine the unavailable declarant, Miss Lowe. Now, to the extent that the state is saying, well, the content, there's corroboration of what? Such that it's admissible as, there's corroboration. Well, there's corroboration that there was a phone call because we have records, but there's no corroboration of the content of the communication as between Torgerson and Miss Lowe that this witness is going to talk about based on what she was told by Miss Lowe, the unavailable declarant. I guess the other thing is this. If we have, the state's indicated, well, we already have evidence by Torgerson's own admission that he knew Mahomes was in jail. I guess I really don't understand the purpose of the evidence. Because apparently it's coming out of Torgerson's own mouth at any one of his several interviews that, yeah, I knew Mahomes was in jail. So I'd ask you to sustain the objection on hearsay.
Okay, it is hearsay. State's putting forth two exceptions to it. One is the statement of recent perception, and also under the residual hearsay. And I think it fits, I'm more comfortable with fitting under the residual hearsay exception in as much as there is corroboration. This happened without really time to fabricate something to be untruthful, and there's no reason to have to be talking to a friend. I think you can also shoehorn it into the recent statement of recent perception or explaining what just took place. Again, for the same reasons. It happened within moments. It wasn't recounting something that happened much earlier. So I will overrule the objection. Let's bring the jury back in.
If we can have 1 minute before we do that, there was a witness prep meeting that took place. There was a report that was made that was provided to Attorney Wilmouth. We're just trying to locate it in case Ms. Clendenning needs to have her recollection refreshed. So I don't know if the jury wants to sit here while we're trying to find it. It might take just a minute or two to look at it.
It's
4060.
Are we on?
I think it would be up for
Yeah, do it. You know what it was said?
Thank you.
You may be seated.
Thank you, Josh. When we last spoke, we were talking about a phone call that we received on October 9th of 2010, presumably from the defendant, Mr. Torgerson, correct?
Can you repeat that?
Yes. When we last left off, we were discussing a phone call that you heard that was received by Stephanie on the phone of Erica Holmes from Kristopher Torgerson.
Correct.
Now, when we left off, you had indicated that you didn't recall if the call was on speakerphone or not. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall speaking to myself, Attorney Before, and Detective Holtz by phone on March 2nd of 2017?
Yes.
And do you recall indicating to Detective Holtz and us in that message, or in that phone call, that you recall that Stephanie had answered that call on speakerphone?
Yes.
Is that in fact accurate, or is that inaccurate?
I want to say that it was on speakerphone.
It was on speakerphone.
Correct.
And do you remember indicating to Detective Holtz that you could hear the voice of Kristopher Torgerson, which you recognized while the call was on speakerphone?
Yes.
And is that in fact accurate or inaccurate?
Accurate.
Okay. And do you recall, and I think you may have testified to this already, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that Stephanie was annoyed with Torgerson for calling Eric's cell phone?
I think that's where we had stopped.
Okay. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
Accurate.
Okay. I should do this. You said you knew Kristopher Torgerson. Is he in the courtroom today?
Yes.
And just for the purposes to make sure we're all talking about the same person, can you point in his direction and just kind of mention, is he at the defense table?
Yes.
Directly behind me, basically?
Yes.
I'd ask that the record reflect she's identified Mr. Torgerson.
Stipulate to identification, Your Honor.
Thank you. Just to go back to a couple things from the residence, do you recall if when you were there on Sunday, October 10th, if the lights of the apartment were off or on?
I don't recall.
And I think you said that the dog pee you said was dry, correct?
Yes.
Which means that it had probably been a while since someone had been there?
Yes.
Did you try, or did anyone that was with you try calling Stephanie's phone
We had tried throughout the whole entire day.
while you were inside the apartment?
That I don't recall.
So you don't know if any of you called it to see if you could hear it ringing?
I don't remember.
And what was your cell phone number then? Do you remember? Was it the same as it was?
It's not the same as it is now, no.
Do you remember what it was?
I don't. It was a 715 number. I think it was like 297. I don't remember.
If you heard it, would you recognize it?
Very possible.
715-846-7030?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And lastly, when you, on October 10th of 2010, was there a point when you had gone to pick up your daughter?
Yes.
And where was your...
I'm sorry. Can you ask that question again?
Of course I can. Was there a point on October 10th where, I should have phrased this better, did you left your daughter with Andrea on October 9th in that time frame?
Not October 9th.
October 10th.
October 10th I did, yes.
And was there a point in time when you went back to pick up your daughter at Andrea's?
Yes.
And Andrea is Andrea Wadinsky,
Correct.
the then girlfriend and mother of the child of Kristopher Torgerson?
Correct.
What time, if you recall, did you go to pick up your daughter?
It had to have been close to 10, close to 10:30
PM?
p.m.
Was Kristopher Torgerson there at the residence?
At that time, he was not. He had come after I was already there.
Okay, so he arrived once you were there.
Yes.
Do you remember about what time that was?
No, I do not.
I shouldn't have said last thing because I feel like now I'm not being honest with you, but you knew that Stephanie and Eric had some rough habits. Eric sold some drugs.
Yes.
And that Stephanie would help him.
Yes.
When Eric was in jail, were you aware that Stephanie had tried to kind of keep things going for money while he was incarcerated?
Yes.
And there's a phrase that was used, and so correct me if I'm wrong, re-upped. Are you familiar with that phrase?
Yes.
And was that something that Stephanie had done in recent times of her disappearance?
Yes.
So if you were looking for her on Sunday, what was your knowledge of when she had re-upped?
Saturday. It was either Friday or Saturday, but I'm almost certain it was Saturday.
And what does re-upped mean?
She had just gotten more drugs.
Okay, and as we had talked about, she was planning on selling those drugs?
I believe she was going to hold it until after he was already out.
You meaning Eric?
Yes.
Okay. Was she, if you know, planning on trying to bag the drugs?
I do believe she was.
And bagging means making them available for smaller purchase amounts?
Correct.
During that phone call with Kristopher Torgerson, where you were able to hear his voice, was that information relayed to Kristopher Torgerson?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Sure. Did you hear Kristopher Torgerson expressing an interest in getting drugs from Stephanie Lowe in that phone call while you were hearing the phone call?
I don't recall.
Do you recall hearing Stephanie saying anything about giving drugs to Kristopher Torgerson?
Judge, I'll object. I will. I'll withdraw. I'm sorry.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Do you recall Stephanie saying anything about providing drugs to Kristopher Torgerson during that phone call?
That I don't remember.
Judge, with the permission of the staff, I'm going to use the podium because I can't see down there.
That's fine.
I'm betting I'm only using this because I can't see down here. Okay? I can't see. And I want, you and I have never met, correct?
Correct.
I know this is an incredibly difficult ordeal for you, and we're going to get through this. Fair enough?
Yes.
I just got to ask you some questions, okay? Mm-hmm. And if any point in time you don't understand the question I'm asking or you want to take a break, you'll advise us.
Okay.
So, as I understand it, kind of around after the Packer game on Sunday, October 10, you made your way over to Stephanie Lowe's apartment because nobody had heard from her, right?
I don't recall if the Packers played that day, but yes.
Oh, okay. But anyway, it was about 4:30 or 5 o'clock, if I recall, right?
Yes.
Okay. And at that time, you went with Clark Prosser, and who was Claudia Blake's boyfriend, right?
And yes.
And you went with Shelley Resch, who was Stephanie Lowe's brother, Daniel Blake's girlfriend, right?
Correct.
Okay. And did you know when you went over there at around 5 o'clock or so that Clark Prosser had already made a check for Stephanie earlier, Miss Lowe, earlier in the day?
I had heard that, yes.
Okay. At that time, October 2010, it's my understanding you were living in an apartment on Fergie, F-E-R-G-E Street in Weston, right?
Correct.
And in an adjacent apartment building lived Andrea Wodinsky and Kristopher Torgerson, correct?
Correct.
And in your direct examination, you referred eventually to Andrea Wadinsky as someone you had contact with on October 10th, right?
Correct.
And earlier you indicated Torgerson was dating a good friend of yours. Was that Andrea Wadinsky?
Correct.
Okay. Before you made your way to Stephanie Lowe's apartment with Miss Resch and Mr. Prosser to see why no one has heard from her, you stopped at Andrea Wadinsky's apartment, correct?
It wasn't Andrea's apartment. It was Kristopher Torgerson's apartment.
Which he shared with Andrea Wadinsky, correct?
Not unknown to me.
Okay, well, how about this? When you went over to Kristopher Torgerson's apartment before you made your way over to Miss Lowe's at about 5 o'clock, Andrea Wadinsky was present there, correct?
Yes.
All right. And the purpose of you stopping off at Kristopher Torgerson's apartment to see your good friend Andrea Wadinsky is so that she could babysit your child while you looked for Miss Lowe, correct?
Correct.
And Miss Wadinsky said in response to that request, what? Sure, no problem?
Correct.
Did you tell her why you needed her babysitting?
Yes, I said that I had not heard from Stephanie, and we were supposed to get our nails done, and nobody has heard from her, so we were stopping over there.
And Miss Wadinsky offered you no other information other than the likes of, I'll watch your child while you look for her, correct?
Correct.
When you arrived at the Miss Lowe apartment, and I know this is a very long time ago, the setup is she lived at 701 and a half West Thomas Ave, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And it was essentially, or was, the corner of West Thomas Ave and South 7th Street, right?
Yes.
Okay. Along South 7th Street, there's an entry-level door, red in color, to go upstairs to get to the apartment, right?
Correct.
All right. I want to ask you about that door when you arrived, and again, I know it's difficult to remember, but that door when you arrived at about 5 o'clock, locked or unlocked?
That I don't recall.
Do you remember, you've had a series of interviews with law enforcement, correct?
A few, yes.
Yeah. And one of those was with Detective Jennifer Holtz, who's seated at counsel table, right? One or more, right?
Yes.
And those interviews would have been closer in time to the incident than whatever was happening at Miss Lowe's apartment then today, right? Obviously.
Yes. And
do you remember telling Detective Holtz on, I think the date of this one would have been January 31, 2014, that you believe the lower door was unlocked? Does that refresh your recollection?
Vaguely.
Okay. The lower door, what you remember about it, was it locked with a button or with a movement of the knob? Do you remember, Miss London?
No.
Was there a deadbolt to that lower door? If you remember?
I don't recall. I do remember.
And you certainly don't recall whether the street level door was deadbolted when you arrived at 5 o'clock, right?
I can recall it wasn't deadbolted.
Because you guys were able to enter and you didn't have a key, right?
Correct.
All right. You just don't know whether that door was otherwise unlocked.
Correct.
Okay. But when you made your way up to the steps and got to the main apartment entrance door to Miss Lowe's apartment, you do remember that was locked, right?
Yes.
Because somebody had to use their credit card to jimmy it and get in, right?
Correct.
Okay. Did that door, if you remember, Miss Clendenning, that upper apartment door, did that have a deadbolt to it?
I vaguely remember if it had a doubled.
Okay. But you know that wasn't in place when you went up that evening, early evening, because somebody could just jimmy it and get in.
Correct.
Didn't have to mess with the deadbolt.
Right.
Got it. When you get into the apartment, Miss Ayala talked to you about some rooms and things you observed, right?
Yes.
Because you would have cautiously looked around, right?
Yes.
There was, within Miss Lowe's apartment, a dining room table, right?
Yes.
Did you see that?
Yes.
Thanks. Just adjacent to the kitchen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Bunch of stuff was on it, because there typically was, right?
I don't recall what was on her table.
You remember writing a note saying, Stephanie, call us, and putting it on that table in a big, like, paper bag document with a crayon? You remember that?
I had wrote this.
You or Miss Resch. Do you remember that?
I don't.
All right. How many, you've been in that apartment like twice before?
No, I've probably been in there a couple times. More than 2.
Okay. Do you remember whether there was a carpet or rug typically under that dining room table? Do you remember?
I don't recall.
Do you remember that on that dining room table, you don't remember so yet, I gotta ask, there was a container of Tupperware where Miss Lowe kept a bunch of coins and excess change? Do you remember that?
No.
When you made your way into the apartment and you walked down the main hallway, do you remember seeing a mirror resting on the floor of the main hallway that appeared out of place?
I don't recall.
Do you remember from your visits to the apartment that when you walk in, the apartment door opens inside the apartment, and behind that door is a mirror typically on the wall? Do you remember that?
That I don't recall.
Okay. The main bedroom is where you saw the stuff that horrified you, right?
Correct.
Across the hall from that main bedroom, there was a spare bedroom, a second bedroom, right?
Correct.
And if I understand the way things were back then, Mr. Mahomes' children would stay in that room, right?
I do believe so.
And typically, if you remember, that the door to that spare bedroom was closed, right?
I don't recall.
When you go into the bedroom of Miss Lowe, you make these horrific observations, right?
Mm-hmm.
May I approach you and look at some of these exhibits?
The ones that were used, or the ones on the right?
May I approach you then? Thanks. I want to show you what's been may I approach the witness as well?
May.
Thank you, Judge. What's been previously marked as states exhibit number 4, and that is a shot to the north of Miss Lowe's bed, right? Yeah, I know.
Is this the side where the windows are?
Yeah, and you're pointing to the
Towards-
wall adjacent to the bed.
Thomas Street.
Yes, the windows adjacent to Thomas Street. You with me? All right. And there looks to be, between the bed and those windows adjacent to Thomas Street, an empty space, right?
Yes.
At least according to exhibit number 4, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what you and I just looked at. We see that empty space, right?
Correct.
to the, let's not do east, west, north, and south, I'm with you. To the left in that picture is the wall that's adjacent to West Thomas Street, right?
Correct.
West Thomas Ave, right? West Thomas Street, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's where the windows are, right?
Yes.
Wasn't there typically a table there in that area that's blank? That has nothing?
The table when we had walked into the room was at the foot end of the bed.
Right. At the foot of the bed, so it would be at the front of the mattress in this picture, was what appeared to be an end table, right?
Yes.
It was an end table with a white sheet upon it, correct?
It was one of those circle tables with the 3 legs and the glass top on top.
Covered with a sheet.
I believe so, yes.
And you believe that table was typically in that spot depicted in exhibit number 4, right?
To be quite honest, I don't recall if it was in that corner or where she usually kept it.
Okay. But this bed, this circular table with the glass top was literally in front, at the foot of the bed, which was a little unusual, agreed?
Correct.
And it is upon that table that you would have taken, you or Clark Prosser and Shelley Rush, and put a liquor bottle that was resting on the mattress on that table, right?
I do believe, yes.
All right. And this was the Don Julio tequila bottle, do you remember? Brown color?
Yes, it was a brown and it was a weird shaped bottle.
And you're saying it was unopened,
Correct.
So it was still full of liquor, right?
Oh, no, it was like closed. I don't recall if there was alcohol in it or not.
But somebody moved it from the mattress, spare mattress, to that table, right?
Correct.
And it was literally just laying on that bare mattress on its side, right?
Cassie will be right after.
I can't get to my documents now, these e-files here. So I know I've done it, I've put it in folders, and I cannot access the folders, but I know that they addressed any issue, and that there was actually 2-1.
Anytime I think the judge documents?
We're off the record.
On the record here.
We're on the record?
Well, I'm looking, I thought we had addressed the identity issue, and there's also the issue of unnamed third party, but that was all part of the motion.
I'm sorry.